This episode is with somebody
You guys want to a little bit different.
My guest on this episode of Unbeatable is Chris Dreisbach. Now, Chris has been where a lot of us, almost all of us have been, in some of those socially awkward situations where you just felt like you didn't sit in or fit in. And then all of a sudden, Chris made a decision which started him down a path that should have destroyed his life. And in the end, a judge finally cared enough about him to make sure that Chris got into a drug treatment facilities. And that decision not only turned Chris's life around, but is touching many, many lives. So many lives that people are watching it live. They're streaming the results of what Chris and Blueprints for Personal Recovery is doing. So I'm excited to introduce you to my guest on this episode of Unbeatable, Chris Dreisbach.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Chris, thanks for joining me on this episode of Unbeatable, man.
Jeff, it's a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
I've got a question I want to start with. This is going to sound to the listeners like one of those guy walks into a bar joke, but it's not a joke. What does a community art gallery, food truck service, and wrestling academy all have in common?
Those would all be companies that I've invested in here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I did this for the listeners because they're right now scratching their head like, wait a second, what is the common thread that ties art gallery, wrestling academy, and food service company together? And the answer to that question is you, man.
It is. And there's another thing that kind of ties them all together is building people and building entrepreneurs. And that's kind of become my, hobby, life, passion. One of 8 million passions I have is just being able to put pieces together for people to achieve their dreams. And that's what each of those are. I don't really love art, even though I have a beautiful eagle right behind me here.
Yes, he does.
I'm not a big art guy, but there were 3 amazing people in recovery who, wanted to start an art gallery, a community art gallery for the underserved. And they came to me with an idea. I gave them homework. They nailed the homework, and now they have a real successful art gallery for the last year and a half, and they're doing some great work for the community, the underserved populations. I mean, it's just not my wheelhouse, but an awesome thing to see and an awesome new community to be built out of just giving people a chance. So that's what they have in common.
So you talked about Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Anybody who's watching on YouTube can see this guy is a Philadelphia Eagles fan based on the gear that's behind him. A couple of years ago, my family had a chance to do a little family vacation, and we went to Lancaster. Of course, you got to go to, the Hershey Park while you're there. But for us, it was more a matter of being able to see some of the early American history. So we went to, Independence Hall in Philly, and we went to Valley Forge, and man, it was just an amazing time. It was early summer, and the weather was beautiful. And I'll tell you, man, this community is just stunning. So in order for people to get this picture, can you describe the idyllic community, the heart of Amish country, and what Lancaster is like, let's say late spring, early summer, with the horse and buggies still on the road and, people working, rolling up their sleeves and working hard to make the farm work?
I mean, it's a pretty cool spot. Lancaster County is so diverse and interesting because we have an actual city of Lancaster that's right in the center of the county. And then you have Amish all over the place, out west, out east. Every morning around 3:00, a horse and buggy drives in front of my house. And my dogs used to hate it. They used to go completely bonkers, just nuts because there's horses driving out front or running around out front. And, usually like Sunday morning as they're all about to get ready to go and party or whatever the heck they do on Sundays, usually there's a nice stream of them running. But the diversity is pretty cool because Lancaster City is one of those sanctuary cities that really invite refugees in and people of different cultures and races and religions and creeds. And it's just such an awesome dichotomy of humanity when we all can come together for, greater purposes. And
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
for
Lancaster's
people,
beautiful.
it is absolutely gorgeous. I was like, man, to be able to sit there, watch the sun come up, and as you said, horse and buggy, and I mean literally horse and buggy cruising down the street. The guy who's working in the field is still got a yoke tied to, behind some animals plowing up the field. And for people around the world that are listening, this isn't just a television show. This is, no kidding, what Amish country is like, and Lancaster County it has to be the epicenter of Amish country in the United States.
I believe it is. And, I have a beard, but I'm not actually Amish. And I love electricity and I love air conditioning and I love, all the modern comforts.
Yeah.
But there are actually people who do live here in Lancaster County who don't use electric. They don't use credit cards. They don't trust banks like most people. Maybe they have it right.
I was going to say, people that are driving and listening to you right now may have to pull over and think about this for a second. Yes, they don't use electricity. They don't have a cell phone. They are not on the internet. They don't, use most of the modern conveniences, and many of them are doing just fine. It's just a whole lot of hard work where they live.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can drive around here all day and see, people in fields and actually horses and different animals pulling plows. And yeah, I'm grateful that I'm not one of them and I'm not doing that stuff because it's not me. It's not me.
One real quick, interesting story. We decided to play golf one afternoon at a mini golf course in Lancaster County, and it was obviously, hand built. So this has got to be the most unique mini golf course I've ever been on in my life. Like rocks that made a little stream flow through the middle of it, and obviously, the little tiny mini golf fairways were kind of handmade. And I'm like, man, every bit of this looks like it was done with hammer and chisel, and nothing but hard work. And it was just us on the mini golf course. We had a blast. It was kind of like walking back in time 150 years ago. That's what it was like for us in Lancaster, PA.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're talking about too. It's a pretty cool golf course, but I don't think it's around anymore. I think it may have died.
We probably broke it. That's
You
what
killed
happened,
it.
my family and I. Okay, so I'm doing all of this on purpose because now the listener's getting an idea of this idyllic little, community that has a incredible diversity, but it's still got, people that are living like they did in the 17 and 1800s. How does a kid from that part of the world end up with the drug addiction that you ended up with? And this is just a chance for you to just take the mic at this point, man, and start telling your story.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not from Lancaster originally. I was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is a whole
Oh, yeah,
whopping
Steel Town,
70
right?
miles north
Yeah.
of here. So I was born in Allentown. I grew up in a sweet little suburban town called Emmaus, just south of Allentown. And, theoretically speaking, I still grew up in that idyllic, beautiful, suburban, great space. And, while we were in this great school district with, plenty of wealthy folks, middle-class folks, my family was just a little bit poorer than everybody. And,
Okay.
I always, from day one, I kind of separated myself from everybody else just based on that. And while there was no reason for me to turn to drugs that was outward and clear and open, I did. I started drinking when I was 13 at a family wedding. And at that family wedding, I drank. There was an open bar, and I was a 13-year-old who was probably 6'3" and 240
You
pounds
were
at that point.
6'3" at 13 years
Somewhere,
old?
somewhere
Holy
in that
smokes,
realm. I mean,
man.
I'm only 6'5" now, so I stopped growing at 15, and I think the universe really just hated me because
I'm getting an image of a 6'5" 15-year-old walking down the halls of school. Holy cow, man.
yeah, I mean, I went to school with a guy who played in the NBA too, so I was never the biggest. I was always the second biggest.
Second biggest.
And tough life
Yeah.
over here. But, I grew up in that great spot, but for some weird reason, there was always something off about me internally, and I could never really feel connected to people around me. I could never feel connected to, the universe. I could never really feel connected to anything. And that showed in different symptoms that I like to talk about that are fairly relatable to a lot of individuals who've struggled with this. I always felt real uncomfortable in social situations. So, for example, if I was on a podcast with a bunch of random people I'd never met, I would feel really, really uncomfortable, even though as a kid, podcasts didn't exist.
Yeah.
I just really never felt connected to anybody anywhere. And it caused a lot of social anxiety, I think is the simplest way to put that. Another thing that I always like to talk about is my racing mind. For some reason, I would always be thinking about everything under the sun all the time. And, I never was able to sleep at night. It was always a difficult thing for me as a youth. And, I'd wake up in the morning and have to go to school, and school's an awkward social situation, and I just don't fit in, and it's a terrible setup. And when I find drinking, it takes all that stuff away. It makes me feel comfortable. It makes me all right. And I start to drink as often as I possibly can from that moment on. And after a while, that stops working for me. It stops producing the effect that it once did. And I have to move into more dangerous things like marijuana and pharmaceuticals and psychedelics. And, eventually it lands in cocaine and heroin.
Now you described a little bit about 13 years old at the wedding, but what was it that alcohol was doing for you at 13 years old that eventually it wasn't accomplishing for you anymore? Now I got to look for the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing.
Comfortability is what it did. It kind of took that awkward feeling I had inside of me and it got rid of it. And in a room where I was just uncomfortable to exist before, suddenly I felt almost like the room was lucky to have me. And it was,
Wow.
alcohol
Yeah.
gave me that amount
Yeah.
of confidence and that amount of power to be able to walk into a room for the first time in my life and feel like I belonged, feel like that's where it was, or really just wherever I was. It was perfect. As long as I was intoxicated, as long as, something was going on to damage my brain.
What did it sounds like you had a pretty normal childhood. So when you started drinking, you were at the wedding. Mom and dad must have been around, or one of the two were around. What did they say about it?
I got grounded for the rest of my life.
Okay.
It's even been said I'm still out on furlough to this day from that incident, almost 30 years ago. And, I wasn't allowed to drink. That was not something that was acceptable to them. It was, I had a lot of older family members who were kind of in the drug and alcohol world, if you will. And, they kind of maybe made that exciting to me, made that acceptable to me, made that interesting to me. And, that's not a topic I usually dive into when we're talking about, how I got started, but it's kind of true. The influence of older folks who were way cooler to me may have led to some of that.
That's fascinating. I've had the chance to interview a couple of other people on the show, guys that have had a incredible addiction to drugs. It's taken them all down the same path that you've gone. And most of them came from fairly normal, fairly healthy childhoods. And then it was one small step. And now that they're healthy and they're, sober and they're on the other side of it, they're looking back at their life and they're saying, man, that one small step, I had no idea where that one small step was going to take me. For the listener, this is not a do not do drugs episode, but do not do drugs. You're going to hear from Chris's life, man, what this thing can do to you. But what I really want the people to hear is none of the folks that I've interviewed ever recognized when they were taking that first small step where this thing could go. In fact, it was only many years later and after decades of carnage that they look back and say, if I would have just known then, I would have never taken the first step. So 13 years old, at a wedding, take a drink.
I don't know that I could really, I might have to counter that a little bit because I was in DARE class, left and right of whenever the school threw me in DARE class and they told me all the horrors and the dangers of drugs and alcohol. I was well aware. I was highly aware of what that did. I'd seen family members go to state prison. I'd seen people that I know.
For real.
Yeah, I'd seen people that I know, at 14, 15 overdosing and dying. And I don't know. I don't know that prevention would have done much to prevent me from doing that. So I will counterpoint that one a little bit. I still don't recommend doing drugs personally. Not a great
I would
move.
agree. Personally, don't recommend it either. I'm with you 100%, man.
But if you
If
do,
you're
become
if
aware
you're
of what to do
yes.
to get better. That's all. Yeah.
Well, that's where we're going next. But I want people to kind of get in your brain for a second. So if your friends at 14, 15 years old are OD, and if you have adults in your life that are going to prison for drugs, what's going through your mind when you move from marijuana to some hallucinogens to cocaine to heroin? Because you already have an idea of how dangerous this is.
I think there was a certain societal level where it was acceptable on at least some level in my brain to use marijuana, to use different psychedelics, to, cocaine was a little bit of a borderline there. Like, oh no, maybe we're
Like, uh-oh, maybe I'm crossing the line now.
Well, the real line was heroin, and I wrote that line in the sand. It was a real proverbial line in the sand. And when I was using cocaine and it stopped producing the effect, I drew that line in the sand and I said, I will not ever try heroin because that's what I've seen destroy people's lives. I'm not
Oh,
that kind of guy. I'm never going to do that. And then, contrary to my plan, of course, somebody offered it to me and I immediately said yes.
all right, perfect. This is what I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
So you have this hard stop in your mind. Okay, I'm doing marijuana, maybe not that big of a deal. All right, I'm moving to other drugs. Now I'm starting to not be entirely comfortable with where this thing is taking me, but I'm definitely never, ever, ever going to do heroin until you do heroin for the first time. And there's lots of people listening right now that are saying, okay, I've drawn some lines in the sand for myself. I have made a promise to myself. I'm never, ever, ever going to do that. But then again, Chris, so did you. So what happened when somebody offered you heroin for the first time and Coke wasn't doing it for you anymore? And you knew in your heart, this could kill me. And you did it anyway.
I mean, it was it was so sudden. I was at a keg party and I may have already been intoxicated on some level. But a man approached me with a little wax paper bag filled with brown powder, which was heroin. And he said, Chris, would you like to try this? And I immediately responded, yes. It wasn't like I had time to stop and call my 6 closest advisors or
Yeah.
write a nice list about why it's a bad idea or, any of the things that they would have taught me in school or any of the things that they would have taught me in a prevention class anyway. I had no ability to just stop and do that, despite having drawn that line in the sand. There's this one area of my life where I'm incapable of saying no. And it didn't even make sense to me at that point because I don't even think science had caught up to it yet.
Yeah.
And, thankfully now in 2024, we know so much more about the
Oh, yeah.
brain, so much
Yeah.
more about addiction. And
Right.
growing up when I did, which wasn't even all that long ago, we just weren't there. And
Yeah.
thankfully now in 2024, we are, and we have answers to this. We have solutions to these problems. And I never found them early enough.
Well, there's two types of people that are listening to this part of the episode, Chris. There's those guys or gals that are listening and saying, wait a second, if Chris drew a really hard line in the sand and he crossed over it, Chris must not be as strong as I am, because if that was me, I would have never taken heroin. And for that person right there, I want to warn them because Chris was the guy who said, I'll never do this. And then he does it. And honestly, anybody who's ever crossed a line that they knew they shouldn't cross, they all had this same aversion that you do. And something or some reason caused them to cross over this moral line that they promised themselves they'll never do. I'm trying to warn the audience, myself included. And then there are a handful of people that are listening right now that are saying, uh-oh, if this could happen to Chris and he put a hard line in the sand for himself and crossed over it anyway, then it can happen to me too. And that person is probably the most prepared for, challenges or temptation or some kind of, something dangerous that can destroy your life. If you already know I'm vulnerable here or I'm susceptible here, it's the guy or the gal that thinks I'll never do what Chris did that ends up doing it.
That's me. That's what I did. That's my attitude in my early life was just like, nothing will ever happen to me. I'm invincible. At
Yeah.
18 years old, we all feel
Of course.
invincible.
Yeah. Especially when you're 6'5" and towering over everybody else around you.
Doesn't hurt when you're
Yeah.
much larger. But, like that attitude is exactly where that led. And it's a great point. We don't talk a lot about that either. Just that feeling of invincibility and that
Yeah.
delusion of invincibility kind of led me a lot of places I don't think I would like to go anymore.
Nobody does. I've seen it countless times. Nobody does what you've done. Nobody does the kind of self-destructive behavior that doesn't say it's not going to happen to me. Might happen to everybody else, but it's not going to happen to me. And then pretty soon the same thing happens to them that happens to everybody else. But when they tried it for the first time, in their minds they thought it would never happen to me. What happens to everybody else? And yet they do it anyway.
Yeah, and it's never going to go anywhere. I mean, drugs will be here probably for all time.
Until time ends. Yep.
Yep. And, people are always going to do it, no matter how much we
Yeah.
talk about it, no matter how much we discuss the downfalls, the pitfalls, the dangers. It's always going to be ever present in our communities, even idyllic little beautiful spots like Lancaster
Yeah.
County.
Yeah.
And, government efforts sure don't do much at all, if anything. And yeah, it's going to be here for a long time. And it's really good to have people on the ground floor working hard to help people
Absolutely.
out of that pit that I used to be in.
Yours is the perfect story to illustrate that, just because of the unique place where you were and the time that you were, this happened to you. Look, man, we can spend hours talking about the
Yes.
bad road that heroin took you down and drug addiction took you down. But ultimately, you've already mentioned it, man. Your life starts to go a very bad direction in and out of jail. Let's talk about the events that led up to a judge saying either you go to a rehab clinic or rehab facilities or else.
Well, I mean, the or else had already happened. I was already in jail. I got out the first time, and after I spent, I don't know, 75, 80, 90 days sitting in jail wearing a monochrome colored uniform, trading my name in for number 0131644.
He
I
still
like,
has the number memorized.
I know,
Yeah.
I know it well, because I traded my name in for that number again and
Yeah.
again and again, and it didn't really make much sense because every time I was in jail, I was sober, physically sober, emotionally sort of sober. I was technically not addicted to drugs because I lived in there for 80, 90
That's
days.
right. You can't. It's really hard to get addicted to drugs when you're in prison for 90 or 80 or 90 days. Yeah.
I mean, if I had money, I could have gotten drugs, but I was poor. So I didn't. But I was physically sober. And through that time, when you get plucked out of society and tossed in a cage, it's not something you want to do again.
Yeah.
Most people.
Right.
I've met a few that maybe do better in jail. But for me, I wanted to be a good son, a good brother, a good cousin, a good just employee. I wanted to go wait tables. I wanted to do anything I could to not end up back in jail.
To
And so I
not end up back
formulated,
where I am right now. Right.
yeah, and I formulated plans as to how I was going to do that. And they sounded really logical to me. Like, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to work a lot of hours and get back with my girlfriend and everything will work perfectly because now I'm sober physically. So why would I ever go back to this drug? And as soon as I get released from jail, a switch flips. And suddenly I find myself moving towards heroin, almost against my will.
You're telling the exact same story that every guy that I've interviewed in your situation has said. Exact same thing. As soon as I got out of jail, I went straight back to heroin again.
And it's demoralizing. It's dehumanizing, especially as a person who has moderate willpower. I mean, I lost near 100 pounds recently. People with
All
weak
right. Way to
willpower
go, Chris.
don't do
Good
stuff
job.
like that.
Yeah.
And, I have 15 companies and I've done all these great, crazy things that people with weak willpower don't really usually do. But there's that one area, that one spot, this piece of my brain that just goes right back to it every single time.
I am sure there's people listening right now that are saying, I got that same area in my life. It may not be drugs, but I got the exact same thing that Chris has.
Yes. And it's a real thing. Some people equate it to sugar. Some people equate it to caffeine, nicotine, gambling, especially now in the 2020s where gambling is so prevalent. The process addictions are things that people kind of relate to. Almost anybody can relate to that because, sugar is a thing that's everywhere.
Right.
Alcohol
Sure.
is so pushed, you love having a beer after dinner. There's so many different things that people can relate to. And I think it's that feeling of emptiness that kind of leads to whatever those process addictions become.
There it is right there. Emptiness is the thing that drugs or gambling or sugar or whatever it is trying to fill. But of course, none of those things fill an empty heart, right?
Yep. It's a sad life, you know?
What happened at this long-term treatment facility? So you're in a courtroom, judge orders you to go whether you want to or not.
Oh no,
What
it
happened?
was optional.
Oh, it was.
But when the option is, I mean, I guess it wasn't optional because they did make me go.
Well,
I
basically
lied
the
to you.
option is
You're right.
you can go back to jail or you can go to this long-term treatment facility. I recognize that as an option, but it sounds an awful lot like 99% of the
Yes.
deck is stacked in towards one choice.
It's a faux option. That's what,
Right.
courts often give you faux options. You know, it's like, oh, you go do that or you just keep suffering. So the first time he sent me to treatment, I went, and the treatment center didn't really do much to help me with my addiction. It was more of a Department of Corrections behavior correction facility. And so what I learned was like how to keep my shirt tucked in and how to sing in front of groups to embarrass me and how to sit in a corner with a dunce cap if I didn't make my bed for 24 hours to like, or, you know, another favorite one was everybody in the entire rehab sitting in the same room staring at somebody who made a mistake so that, I mean, just the absolute most cockamamie,
That's what it sounds like.
illogical stuff. So you have a brain disease that is creating this problem. And this is where science comes in. There are still treatment centers that do this stuff to this day, and it's sickening to me. So I was there as a 19-year-old kid just trying to survive, just trying to make sure I don't go back to jail. And this is what people are telling me that I have to do to get there. So I am the nerd in the front row, and I have like my spectacles ready. I'm taking notes. I'm doing everything I can because I don't want to go back to jail. I really don't. I don't want to keep disappointing my mom, my dad, my little brothers. I don't want them to feel ashamed of me. I don't want them to have to go to work and school and be ashamed of their felon brother or son, or I just want to be okay. So I sit in this treatment center, do everything I'm told. I get my little certificate and I get out, and within a couple hours, I find myself high again. And I can't tell you how that happened because I sat in jail again for a period of time, then went to this treatment center, probably darn near a year sober at that point. 0 seconds of ability when the keys to my life got back in my hands.
Wow,
stay
man.
sober.
That's crazy.
It is.
You mentioned, just for a second, you mentioned the shame that this puts on your parents or your family or stuff like that. And every one of the folks that I've interviewed that has a drug addiction has said the same thing. In fact, Andrew Chalmers, my first interview, his mother wrote a book that says nobody ever comes to visit. Nobody knows what to say to the mother of a drug addict. Everybody knows, has kind of the right words for the guy or the gal that's trying to recover from a drug addiction, but nobody ever knows what to say to the parents or the family.
It's true. And that's something that's, it's talked about in Al-Anon and it's talked about in some other areas, but that shame is a special shame, because as a parent, I'm a new dad for the last 2 years. And
congrats.
Thank you. And I got to say, I feel like even when, he's not writing novels at 2 years old, I feel like a failure. That's like the parenting mantra. It's like, I feel responsible for my child. And so while my mom didn't do anything remotely bad to me at all, or it was 0% her fault, how I ended up in that situation, the amount that she took on as a result of my actions, crushing to my soul to know that I caused the woman I love the most that much pain.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to this final treatment facilities. What changed at this last long-term treatment facilities that finally helped you get healthy?
None of them were ever long-term because long-term requires money. And usually back in that day, at least, the county would pay for things for 20 days, 18 days, just whatever the bare minimum was. And I'm grateful for that bare minimum because without it, I might have died. But the last time I went to jail, I went and saw the judge again. This was 2007, August 2007. And Judgy Wudgy said, Chris, you're 20 now. This is the third time I'm seeing you. I'm going to send you to treatment. And thank God for that progressive judge.
Yeah.
Because in 2006, I feel like judges were not firing people into rehab like they do now. And that guy, Robert Steinberg, I'll never forget him either. He fired me into treatment yet again. And I went to another treatment center called Bowling Green Brandywine, right on the border of Pennsylvania and Delaware. Maybe I don't know, 60, 70, 80 miles from Allentown. And at that point, like, I didn't want to be there. I'd already been to treatment a couple of times. I was confident that it was never going to work. I was just
Yeah.
on a vicious cycle where I'm going to go to jail, I'm going to get out, I'm going to fail, I'm going to go back to jail, I'm going to get out, I'm going to fail, I'm going to be just like the rest of
Yeah.
the junkie losers that I've come to know. And at 20 years old, I was convinced that was my life. And
Wow.
that statement alone is dehumanizing.
Yeah,
and
that makes it
demoralizing.
almost impossible to beat this addiction, right? When you're convinced
Yeah.
this is where my life is going to end up.
And there are so many people that I meet and have met over the last 15, 16 years that feel that exact same way. Like, the stuff I've done makes me not deserving of recovery. It makes me not deserving of love. It makes me not deserving of hope. And that is the worst possible place to be, because every human is deserving of love. Every human is deserving of hope, and every human can turn their lives around at any given moment. I'm confident of. And at 20 years old, I was literally hopeless. I saw no hope on the horizon, but because I was in jail, I figured I'd roll with the judge's punches again, and I went to this rehab. When I got to the rehab, I had the clothes on my back that I'd gotten arrested in a couple months before, and I had a real cool hippie counselor. And this little hippie counselor, he was little. I mean, he was like 5'6", maybe
Well, everybody's
140.
little to you, Chris.
This guy was real little.
Okay.
And he was maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. And he recently died, so, R.I.P. Bernard. Love
Yeah.
that guy.
Yeah.
He gave me a sweatshirt off his back. And I'm 6'5", and at that
Yeah,
time, maybe
I'm
220.
imagining what this looks like with your belly sticking out and the sleeves come all the way up your, halfway up your arms because he's the size difference.
It was embarrassing. It was hilarious. But I was cold because I had been in jail for a couple months, and I got to this rehab at
With just the clothes on you're
in,
wearing. Yeah.
late October, maybe early November in Pennsylvania. Cold, cold, cold. And he gave me a little sweatshirt, a little green sweatshirt. And that was the first moment where I was just like, wow, like, that guy doesn't know me at all. And
Yeah,
he just
and
gave me a sweatshirt because I was cold. He didn't ask me for anything else. He just gave me a sweatshirt. And that was not like, I don't think I'm smart enough to fully understand that. But as I look back, that was the moment that I first received love. Plenty of people had
Wow.
loved me to that point, but I think that was the first time I was consciously able to receive it.
Wow. Wow. After the treatment facility, well, first of all, how long did you stay there? Because you described the difference between short-term and long-term treatment, and what's the difference?
I mean, I was there for 21 days, give or take, maybe 20,
Uh-huh.
21 days until the county was ready to boot me out. And hippie counselor, way smarter than me, he shipped me to the Gatehouse, a halfway house in Lancaster County. And I did not want to come here at all. I was like, cornfields, no thanks.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Allentown and give it a good old college try again, because it worked so well the first
Because it's
three
been
times I
going so
tried.
well for you in the past. It's got to go well this time.
And so a random PO, parole officer.
By the way,
for those
parole
of you who-
officer for everybody who doesn't know the language. Go ahead.
For those of you who have never been in jail and paroled, parole
Yeah.
officer is like a babysitter, an adult babysitter. And my
That will
adult
arrest you and throw
babysitter,
you back in jail if you get out
very
alive. Yes.
quickly, for like almost nothing back in the day, they would do
Right.
that. And my PO said, Chris, go to the halfway house or go back to jail. And I said, okay, halfway house sounds nice.
Yeah.
And I went, and I did not have a good attitude. I was really just waiting to fail again because I knew it was a foregone conclusion. I was just wasting time in these dumb cornfields.
Because you're not the guy that can get fixed, right? You're the guy who's going to
Correct.
spend the rest of his life like this.
I'm broken. I do not
Right.
deserve it. I am a criminal. I'm a felon. I am bad. Society has deemed me as bad, and I
Yeah.
accepted it. And thankfully, contrary to my plan, I've learned everything good in my life happens contrary to my plans.
How about that? Yep.
I got lumped in with a group of young guys who were excited about changing their lives and about recovery. And they took me by the hand and they showed me a completely different way to live. And they had almost tricked me into it because I didn't even realize what was happening. I was just like, these guys are cool.
Were these
These
guys
guys
going
are-
through the program with you?
Yeah, I mean, they were a little bit further down the line. Some
Uh-huh.
of them were 1 year sober, some were 2 years sober, some were maybe 3 or 4 years sober, but they were all young and excited. And what I had known about recovery to that point was everybody's like 100 years old and they're angry about their lawnmower and
Uh-huh.
like just mean and sad in a church basement. And that was not the case here. These guys were excited to go out and help people and serve the community and just like be different. And they were happy and they were smiling, and you could see in their eyes, even though I'm a little tired, you could see in my eyes, you know, like they were real. And it was such a cool thing to just be able to latch on to them and go with them and not ask questions and just be like, where are we going? What are we doing? Who cares? Get in the car. And man, that really was able to guide me in the right direction. And I got a job, and I started working again at the local diner here and waiting tables. And I didn't steal
That
anything.
dream
I
that you
didn't-
had when you were in prison, right?
Yeah, yep. I finally made it in 2007 or 8. And, you know, I worked there. I got promoted rather quickly. And then after 3 years, I got unceremoniously fired so that somebody else could do my job. On the next day, I called down to the rehab, and I got a job at that rehab for $9 an hour. I drove 70 miles one way.
Wow.
And even with a sad Hyundai that I had at the time, I lost a lot of money that year that I worked there.
Yeah.
And
I love
it was so beautiful because a lot of the people that I met in 2009 at that treatment center became lifelong friends. They became
Wow.
people who turned their
Yeah.
lives around and really just kind of introduced me to the world of, you know, working in service and in recovery.
I love this because you didn't use this language, but what I heard you saying was being around some guys, some peers was what helped you go further and further down the road with drugs. And then when you got around the right peers in recovery, all of a sudden, like the same thing, just different people with a very different attitude had a radically different impact on your life when you were around some peers that were fired up about getting over this addiction, beating this addiction, and getting healthy.
Yeah, that's legitimately what happened. And I mean, obviously, there was a ton of personal and internal
Sure.
work that had to go into it. But really, having that support group was so instrumental because they made it attractive to want to be sober. Whereas
Yeah.
previously, being sober sounded terrible, sounded miserable. I'm just going to be disconnected and uncomfortable. And my mind's going to be racing a million miles a second, and I'm going to be bored. And it's
You're
going to
gonna
be
go back to being
terrible.
socially awkward and all those things that led you to take the first drink, right?
Yeah, and I'm still awkward. I'm still weird. There's no two
I
ways about that.
sure. So am
But
I. We both are in the same camp there. Yes.
yeah. But I embrace it now. You know, it's fun to be different, and it's nice to be able to inspire people with that difference.
Where did a new life sober living come from?
And that was my first business that I almost kind of accidentally started. A bunch of my friends at the halfway house were all about to be homeless at the same time, and there were probably 8 or 9 of them, and none of them could like get enough money together for an
Right.
apartment.
Yeah.
And I had saved a couple $1,000s from my time waiting tables, and I think with $2,000 I went and rented a nice row home down here in Lancaster, and I had them move in, and we developed a 64-point guideline sheet. To kind of
64 points. All right.
64 points, man. It was 64 points. Things you take for granted normally, like wake up, make your bed, brush your teeth, take a shower, you know, do your laundry, clean yourself, you know, vacuum your room.
Recovering drug
Simple.
addicts can't take that stuff for granted, right?
And you know, when I moved to Lancaster, I didn't even know how to do laundry. You know, like I was a baby bird in life. I knew almost nothing about anything. And like that halfway house taught me how to do things. So I took that, gave them that same option. And so many of those guys stayed sober and did well. More people wanted to come join us. So I had to go rent another place. And then after a while, I had a mentor who said, Chris, stop renting these things, buy them. And I was like, dude, do you know who I am? Like I was just in
Do
jail.
you
a
know
while
what my
ago.
credit record looks like?
Yeah.
Right?
It's terrible. And he actually gave me a loan, high interest.
Wow. Wow.
Gave me a loan for my first rental property. And he showed me like how to pay him back. I mean, I was dumb. And he mentored me to the point where I could understand how to make my money work for me. And it launched me into this entire crazy life that I've led for the last 17 years or 16 years.
I I hope that the listener is not missing what they're hearing from you right now. The guy who his dream in life was to wait tables and to be able to go back home and not to be, the family screw up, the black sheep of the family, not to be the social outcast, is now buying properties and taking care of addicts and making sure that they've got a safe place to get, clean and sober. I I can't imagine that any of these dreams were going on in your head when you were repeatedly in and out of prison and back on heroin the next day and back in prison. Like, who could have imagined your life would take this turn?
I mean, not I. And that's kind of what has led the next, ensuing 15 years afterwards. Because if you'd asked me in 2008 what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a manager at that diner. Like that was it. That was as far. I mean, when I worked at the rehab.
He's aiming high, everybody. He's going for the top. I'm going to
Yeah.
manage this diner one day.
And I did. I became like the
All
third,
right.
fifth manager, like it was big time.
Way to go,
Uh,
man.
And then I got fired. And then I went to work at the rehab. And if you'd asked me at that time what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, I wanted to go back to school and become a counselor. And then that, didn't happen. And I ended up starting that business. And so after a period of time, I just realized, who cares what I'm thinking? Who cares what I'm planning?
Yeah, your
The
plans are
universe
not
has-
always going to go the way you think, right?
They never do. And that is why I let the universe kind of push me wherever it wants. And, sometimes that's a cool podcast with you, Jeff.
Aw.
Sometimes that's, whatever the heck I'm doing another one later.
Yeah.
A totally different one about real estate, and just
All right.
who even cares where the universe tosses you? Wherever it tosses you, make the best of it and make some new friends and brighten some people's lives. And that's kind of the entire attitude that I've taken for the last bunch of years.
So everybody take notice. When you see Chris on Shark Tank one day, you can tell everybody, I know that guy. And I don't mean appearing on Shark Week or Shark Tank. When you see Chris sitting in the seat, listening to people pitching their ideas because of this guy, you can say, I remember that guy way back when he started Blueprint for addiction recovery, man. So
Yep.
let's talk about your blueprint, because you started this program, and honestly, the reason why you're on the show today, man, is because you took a life, turned it around, that was headed towards the grave or prison for life, and you're now helping a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And the name Unbeatable basically says Chris has been punched in the face by life again and again and again. And a lot of those times he punched himself in the face, but he decided, I'm not going to be beaten by life, by my circumstances, and I'm going to help others beat this addiction. So talk about Blueprint for addiction recovery.
Man, Blueprints, it's on the hoodie here if you can see it. I don't know if
I
you're all
got it.
watching
It's a
and
nice
listening,
looking
but
hoodie right there.
thank you. So Blueprints, I started with two of my great friends, Jesse and Ben, in 2016. And, we had just seen a lack of quality treatment in the area. And I'd always done the housing. Those two guys had always worked in treatment. And we just wanted to come together and serve everybody. And a lot of treatment centers will only take you if you have a lot of money. They'll only take you if you have high quality Cadillac insurance. We wanted to do this grand experiment where we were just going to take everybody, regardless of what their funding source was. And it was a
Wow.
grand experiment because sometimes, Medicaid and lower things, they don't really pay as well.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit tougher. That's why not everybody takes them. And we had that grand experiment started in 2016. We went to war, just constantly to try and get, new contracts to be able to take new Medicaids and new county fundings and just knew everything for anybody we could. And the grand experiment worked pretty perfectly because at this point, Blueprints has 180 employees, a ton of different sites, just a tremendous operation. And I think 2 or 3 months ago, I actually hired a new CEO to take my position because
Wow.
I wanted to be able to step back and focus more on family, focus more on things like this, focus more on advocacy. And that new CEO is continuing to drive Blueprints new heights. And
Wow.
while I'm not involved in the day-to-day anymore like I used to be for a bunch of years, just watching them flourish and watching them blow up and do new tremendous things to help the community. And just what a beautiful,
Yeah.
going from eating out of dumpsters, being in jail, and being number 0131644 to being able to watch 180 families eat because of something we started. Watching, people go from a low level $12 an hour position to a six-figure executive role within a couple years' time. I mean, these are just the beautiful things that you don't even really think about. I don't really
Yeah.
think about a lot of the time because it's just part of my world. And now that we get to sit back and talk about that, it's a beautiful thing. I'm starting to tear up a little bit, thinking about
Man,
all
this
the,
is cool.
yeah, it is.
So,
It is.
so this is where a food service company and an art gallery and a wrestling academy, where they all come together, they converge together on your blueprint. And you talked about quality treatment. For a lot of people that have not been in your world, man, they don't know what that means. So you're providing not only a great place to work, forget those numbers, people, 180 people in multiple sites doing a lot of cool stuff, but you're providing some pretty amazing treatment. What, in your words, is quality treatment, Chris?
So it's individualized. And for the longest time, the idea was just mill somebody through. All the treatment
Yeah,
centers that I had been
kind of
to.
assembly line, right? Like everybody follows the same standard routine.
Yes, we all get a little piece of paper, and that little piece of paper says effectively the same thing. Maybe there was a little drop down box where you could pick between 3 or 4 different options, but it was all cookie cutter. And cookie cutter just doesn't work with addiction because we are all different human beings. Even
Right.
people who grew up in the same house are different human beings.
Right.
So why would one blanket approach be the answer to anything? Nothing I've seen in the world has a blanket approach that is effective. And so what we did was we made sure it was truly individualized. So every human that comes in gets an actual treatment plan that is tailored to them and what is going to get them from hopelessly addicted to living a life of purpose. And that's the differential between quality and lack of quality to me. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's a million other components that go
Sure.
into it,
Right.
because if you're going to be living in a slum house with cockroaches and going to a quality treatment facility outpatient, is that the best answer for you? I don't know. But we provide rather nice accommodations for folks who are not used to rather nice accommodations. And that's another thing that I just love watching because a lot of the facilities that I
Yeah.
ended up in were less than beautiful and, may or may not have contributed to that dehumanization
Yeah.
of me. And, that's just stuff that we take very seriously at Blueprints.
Sure.
And again, while I'm not, deeply involved in the day-to-day, I'm still so proud of everything that all the people at Blueprints do.
You obviously understand real estate. It's been pretty clear over the last whatever years that you get real estate. But a few minutes ago, you called this a war. And I remember being a kid in school when they used the war on drugs language, and
Yeah.
told everybody just say no. But it really does sound like you're fighting on the front lines, and you're fighting actually behind the lines is what you're doing, trying to help the guys and gals that are already addicted in a very customized, very tailored way, as opposed to just lobbing stuff, at somebody and hoping that some of it sticks.
And in some cases, that's the best you can do for somebody
Yeah,
who's not ready,
sure.
somebody who's not willing. And it's such a broad scope, and it's so difficult to speak about in just a blanket way because everyone is so different.
Yeah.
I have my story, and I share my story so freely and so openly. But even the next guy, the last guy you interviewed, there's got to be some differentials
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
what happened to him and
Sure.
what happened to me, and
Yeah.
how we got from point A to point B, how we went from hopelessly addicted to living a life of purpose.
Yeah.
And that actually led to one of the docu-series that we have on Prime Video right now called Repurposed,
Purpose.
because we took 4 wildly different, incredible stories of people's path to purpose and did them in a mini docu-series style. And I think those 4 different paths to recovery speak so many different volumes for so many different people. It's something that I'm extremely, extremely proud of.
You're reading my mind, Chris. That's where I was going to go next. I wanted you to talk a little bit about Night of Recovery 1 and 2. about Repurposed, and I want people to be able to go out and to watch or to stream the results of what you get a chance to see, day to day when people go from their hopeless and no future to now thriving. Um, Tell everybody about Night of Recovery and 1 and 2. Tell everybody about Repurposed.
So Night of Recovery is a thing I started with some good friends, Jesus Rodriguez, Shannon Moore, some guys who were in the WWE, the World Wrestling Entertainment, rather popular company that just had WrestleMania this weekend.
All
Uh,
right.
And, that's obviously, I started Three Legacies Wrestling with Jesus when he came here to get sober. He decided to stick around in Lancaster and open his own academy, Three Legacies Wrestling, which I highly recommend you check out on YouTube because it
All
is
right.
awesome, family-friendly community wrestling filled with people in recovery. We do food drives pretty much
Cool.
quarterly. We just literally do anything we can to further community and just include people and bring them
Yeah.
along. Night of Recovery started because he was in recovery. I was in recovery. Our good friend Sean Waltman, who was ex-Pac in the WWE, he was coming out and he was in recovery. And Kurt Hussey, who wrestled as Fandango and now Dirty Dango, also in recovery and was coming out to Lancaster. And we were like, hey, we're all going to be together. Why don't we do an event? Why don't we share our stories in front of an audience, a live audience, and then
All
furthermore,
right.
film it? Let's make it an event. Let's make it a night of education, of community, of, man, just how cool would this be? And everybody was on board just on the first second we talked about it. And it turned out, too, that Kurt was inspired to recovery by videos
Really?
of other people, inspirational videos of people about recovery. And one of the guys
Yeah.
that he mentioned by name was Brandon Novak. And Brandon is a friend of mine. And I said, hey, how cool would it be if you showed up here and surprised Kurt while on stage?
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, man, that would be an honor. Like, I didn't even know I inspired that guy. And he came, just hid in the back corner. We kept him a secret. And just such a beautiful thing to capture. And that was the first Night of Recovery. That's actually going to be on Prime Video shortly. We had to take a weird circuitous route
Sure.
to get that one on there. But the second Night of Recovery, we all came together again in May, a few months later, and we did it in Philadelphia, and then we had a third Night of Recovery. That one just kind of got lost to the earth. We just did that to support a nonprofit, so that never even meant for release. And we did another one at the Moravian Center in Lancaster, which is available on Prime Video. And what a beautiful night. We had members of the treatment community come out. We had homeless folks come out. We had, just a great group of people in that audience. And the stories told that night were so impactful and so powerful that I implore you to check it out. All you got to do is probably find a link somewhere on this podcast or look me up on the internet somewhere. You'll find
We'll
it.
put a link in the notes. You're basically describing the WrestleMania of recovery as what you're describing. This sounds awesome.
Yeah. It is so cool, especially to hear the stories of guys who've achieved high heights. They were performing in front of tens of thousands of people a night, making, healthy amounts of dollars. And here they are struggling with the same thing I struggled with.
Yeah.
And I was homeless when I was living on a park bench. These guys felt the same way I felt. And how cool to be able to connect with somebody on that level, having been in the same sinking ship, in the same painful spot, and then to be able to come out of it and come together and combine powers to inspire others to step out of the mire. There is nothing more beautiful on earth, in my opinion.
I totally agree. Yep. Nothing is more satisfying than knowing I made a huge difference in somebody's life who was really struggling, and now their life is just a little bit better, or maybe they're not struggling at all because I had the opportunity, the privilege of stepping in and making a difference.
Yes.
Chris, people who want to know a little bit more about you, more about Blueprints, or even some of the shows that are streaming right now, how do they find out more?
Well, I think I have a thing called a link tree. It's
All right.
I'm pretty new. I'm pretty new to
tree. Yes.
I'm new to a lot of that stuff, so I still say the TikTok and
Okay.
the Instagram. I'm like one of those old people.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could find my link tree Chris Dreisbach. You can find me on Facebook, Christopher Dreisbach. You can find me on TikTok. There's a lot of really cool inspirational videos on there that have gone
All right.
pretty viral, weirdly. I'm Christopher Dreisbach on TikTok. Just hunt me down, reach out. I mean, every time I do one of these podcasts, I get some kind of message from somebody somewhere.
That's
And
cool.
they say, my son, he's a criminal, but he's not a criminal. He deserves
Yeah.
a better life. And every time a mom or a dad or a grandfather or a grandmother reaches out to me and says that, it warms my entire heart.
Yeah.
It makes my entire day to know that somebody somewhere is currently feeling the way I used to feel, but they have support like that. They have people who love them and people who are ready to go to war to help them get better. And
Yeah.
so, but don't ever be afraid to reach out to me. I weirdly respond to almost everything everybody sends me, even if it's totally bonkers. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
And A Night of Recovery, you said will be available on Amazon Prime pretty soon. Is that correct?
Yeah, so on Prime Video, the original one will be out. Currently, we have Night of Recovery live from Moravian Center on Prime Video and Night of
All right.
Recovery live from Waynesboro Theater, which is
Okay.
a really cool historic theater that used to be the largest stage east of the Mississippi in the early 1900s. So cool history for you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, I just want to say thank you for being on this show. Anybody who wants to know more, we're going to put links to your Linktree account or your Linktree and also for some of these shows. But man, more than anything else, I am really, really fired up by the way that you're helping make a difference in people's lives through blueprints. And dude, thanks for being on this episode of Unbeatable.
And thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I mean, what an awesome idea for a podcast, and what an awesome thing to highlight people who beat the odds. So Thank you for including me, and just what an honor it's been to meet you, man.
I get really, really excited when I hear stories like Jack Gregory, like Tommy Parker, like Andrew Chalmers, like Chris's story today of guys that were totally defeated by drugs. And then all of a sudden they made one last-ditch effort, and that last-ditch effort radically turned their life around. These are the perfect examples of what it looks like to be unbeatable when you've been in and out of prison and you have burned every relationship around you. And then finally, you start to get healthy. You finally start to get sober, and all of them are helping other people get healthy and sober as well. So Chris, thanks for being a guest on this episode of Unbeatable. If you want to go check out his streaming videos about the Night of Recovery, about Repurposed, look in the notes to this episode and you'll see some links to those, and you're welcome to stream it and watch Chris wrestle or war with people that are struggling with an addiction to drugs. And I also want to just thank you for tuning into this podcast. Maybe you found us for the first time, and maybe you just are fascinated by what you hear. Obviously, there are other stories like Chris's, and even amazing stories from people of other walks of life. Why don't you go ahead and subscribe to this podcast? Or better yet, why don't you go ahead and start following us on social media? We're out there pretty much everywhere. Just search for @Unbeatable Podcast. And when you do that, you're going to find some people on social media that are very engaged with us. People like Asher Jones, who is our fan of the week this week. And Asher, I just want to thank you for being so engaged and so connected. Last thing I want to say is we want to help you if you're really struggling. And I created a free resource to help you. It's called the Unbeatable Army Survival Guide. And I call it Survival Guide because if everything else in life is stripped away and you just need enough energy, some motivation to be able to get up tomorrow and face tomorrow's challenges, well, I put all that together in one little PDF, and it's totally free. If you want it, just go over to unbeatablearmy.com, and I'd be happy to send you the Unbeatable Army Survival Guide. I want to thank you for joining me. Chris, thank you for a great conversation, and I hope that you have a great week. I'll see you right back here next time. God bless.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.